Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the most terrifying, most enduring maritime mysteries of the 20th century. We're going to unpack the facts, the hard science, and the wild fiction behind Flight 19 and the legendary Bermuda Triangle. Let's get right into it. 14. That's the number. On the afternoon of December 5th, 1945, 14 lives were lost at sea. What started as just a routine U.S. Navy overwater navigation training flight out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, simply vanished. They never came back. And it's this exact tragedy, the devastating loss of these 14 young men, that really planted the seed for a global phenomenon that still captures our collective imagination today.
Just think about the sheer terror in this actual real-life radio transmission. As this flight went on, the student pilots and their leader began dealing with severe spatial disorientation. Listen to these haunting words from Marine Captain Edward J. Powers. "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." I mean, imagine that panic. You're flying over endless open ocean, the sun is starting to set, and suddenly you have absolutely no idea which way is home.
So, how did this happen? The frantic final hours of Flight 19 played out incredibly fast. At 14:10 hours, 5 torpedo bombers took off from the Naval Air Station. Everything seemed fine, but by 15:40, the compasses started failing and that disorientation set in. We know that confused, intermittent radio calls kept coming through until about 18:20. That was the last haunting message, where the flight leader was actually preparing the squadron to ditch into the rough seas because they were completely out of gas. But, oh man, the tragedy didn't stop there. Later that evening, at 1950 hours, a massive search and rescue plane sent out to find them suddenly exploded midair. That secondary crash claimed 13 more lives.
Section 1, Birth of a Legend. You see, the complete and total lack of wreckage from Flight 19 gave conspiracy theorists a perfect blank canvas. Hundreds of planes and ships scoured hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean. And guess what? They found nothing. Literally nothing. No bodies, no debris, just a terrifying void. And the supposed location of all this? The Bermuda Triangle. It's this loosely defined region in the North Atlantic Ocean, roughly boxed in by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. But here's a crazy fact. It wasn't even called the Bermuda Triangle when Flight 19 disappeared. It wasn't until the 1950s that journalists actually started mapping out this zone of mysterious disappearances and finally gave it the catchy name we all know today.
So, once those boundaries were drawn on a map, writers really went to work fueling the myth. They started combining the Flight 19 tragedy with other massive, older losses in the area. For instance, they pointed back to the 1918 disappearance of the USS Cyclops. That was a massive Navy cargo ship that just vanished with over 300 men on board. Then they lumped in Flight 19 and its rescue plane from 45, the loss of an airborne transport DC-3 in 1948, and the disappearance of 2 passenger airplanes, the Star Tiger and Star Ariel, in 1948 and 1949. By stitching all these isolated events together, this narrative spreads like wildfire. Suddenly, there was a targeted, deadly zone. And for decades since, theories have just collided head-on. On one side, we have these sensationalized myths. I'm talking extraterrestrial abductions, grabbing planes right out of the sky, time warps sucking ships into alternative dimensions, even wild claims about crystal energy beaming up from the sunken city of Atlantis. But as you'll see, the actual scientific reality is far more grounded. We're looking at meteorology, sudden violent storms, incredibly volatile ocean currents, and some very unique geological occurrences.
Section 2, The Science of the Sea.
So what actually makes this specific patch of ocean so genuinely treacherous? Well, first off, the Bermuda Triangle is notorious for its rapidly shifting weather patterns. We're talking conditions that can spawn sudden, violent storms and waterspouts, which are essentially just mini tornadoes out over the open water. Then you have the Gulf Stream. This is a massive, warm ocean current that basically acts like a swift, powerful underwater river. If a plane crashes, the Gulf Stream can carry the debris miles and miles away from the crash site in no time, completely erasing the evidence. Plus, this area is one of the few places on Earth where magnetic anomalies can cause compass variations. Your compass might point to true north instead of magnetic north, and if you're not prepared for that, it'll easily throw off an entire navigation path. Now, there's also this incredibly fascinating scientific explanation known as the methane hydrate theory. Let's walk through how this works, step by step. First, you have these large pockets of methane gas that can suddenly erupt from sediments way down on the ocean floor. Second, as these massive gas bubbles rise up to the surface, they drastically drop the density of the water around them. And third, because that water is suddenly so much less dense, a ship right above it loses its buoyancy. It can literally drop and sink like a rock without any warning whatsoever. Basically, it is quite literally oceanic flatulence swallowing a ship whole. Crazy, right? Section 3, Navigational Hazards and Errors. Because when we look really closely at the disappearance of Flight 19, nature wasn't the only thing working against them. Listen to this terrifying realization from the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor. Both of my compasses are out, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Now, Taylor was a highly experienced pilot, but he was relatively new to flying in this specific area. So when his compasses completely failed, he was forced to rely strictly on visual landmarks while flying over a seemingly endless ocean. And that, unfortunately, led to a devastating mistake. That sheer loss of bearings led directly to a fatal misjudgment. After his instruments went down, Taylor looked out of his cockpit, saw some islands below, and genuinely believed he was flying over the Florida Keys. Because he thought he was in the Gulf of Mexico, his logic was sound. Flying east should bring him right back over the Florida Peninsula. But investigators later figured out he was actually looking at the Bahamas, which is well northeast of the Keys. So by ordering his planes to head further east, he was actually guiding his entire squadron deeper and deeper into the open Atlantic until their fuel tanks simply ran dry. But what about that rescue plane that vanished later that same night? A lot of people claim it was swallowed by a supernatural vortex. Well, the truth is, a nearby merchant ship actually reported seeing a massive explosion in the sky, followed by a heavy oil slick on the water. The aircraft they used for that search was a Martin PBM Mariner, and it was heavily loaded with fuel for a long extended mission. Tragically, these specific aircraft had a very well-documented history of vapor leaks, so a catastrophic mid-air spark and explosion, that wasn't a paranormal event. It was a very real, known risk for that exact type of plane. Section 4. The Statistical Truth. To finally demystify the Bermuda Triangle, we really have to look past the spooky stories and examine the hard data. The perception out there, which is obviously fueled by pop culture, movies, books, is that this is the absolute most dangerous body of water on Earth. But the reality? When you actually account for the massive sheer volume of traffic going through there, because it is one of the most heavily traveled shipping and flight lanes in the whole world, the accident rate is completely proportional. It matches the accident rates of any other exceptionally busy oceanic region on the globe. So, what do the actual experts have to say about this? Official investigations by organizations like the U.S. Coast Guard have consistently concluded the exact same thing. There is nothing extraordinary happening here. Every single investigated disappearance in the Bermuda Triangle stems from physical, ordinary causes. We're talking volatile weather, treacherous ocean currents, mechanical failures, and, as we saw with Flight 19, human error. There is absolutely zero scientific evidence of any paranormal activity. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to chew on. Is the true mystery here the paranormal, or is it simply our fear of the ocean's unforgiving reality? I mean, perhaps our deep desire to believe in alien abductions and time warps is really just a coping mechanism for us. Because sometimes the idea of an indifferent, immensely powerful ocean, one that can result in 14 lives lost at sea in a single afternoon and leave absolutely no trace behind, is far more terrifying than any myth. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a clearer, more grounded perspective on the enduring legend of the Bermuda Triangle.